We like to think we are the masters of this planet. We build cities, we fly planes, we carry guns. We have convinced ourselves that we sit comfortably at the very top of the food chain. But that status is an illusion. It is an illusion maintained by our technology, our walls, and our numbers. Strip away the technology, break the human body, drop it into the middle of the wilderness. And suddenly, you realize the terrifying truth. We are not the masters, we are not the hunters. We are slow, we are soft, we have no claws, we have no armor. We are simply meat. Imagine you are a pilot. You are flying over the African savannah, one of the most beautiful yet hostile environments on Earth. One minute, you are soaring above the trees, watching the herds of elephants and prides of lions from the safety of the sky. The next minute, the wind catches your wings, the engines scream, the ground rushes up to meet you. Grunge. You wake up in the wreckage. You try to move, but you can't. Your legs are shattered. Your feet are facing the wrong way. Your bones are sticking out of your skin. You are trapped in the cockpit of a crushed plane. The smell of aviation fuel is everywhere. But that isn't the worst part. The worst part is that the crash was loud. And in the African bush, a loud noise is a dinner bell. You look out the shattered windshield. You see the vultures circling. Then you hear the trumpeting of angry elephants. And then, as the sun goes down, you see the grass moving. You see the yellow eyes reflecting in the moonlight. The lions have arrived, and they know you can't run. This is the story of Greg Rasmussen. It is a story of a man who went from being a conservationist protecting wildlife to being a defenseless snack for that very same wildlife. It is a story of 80 hours of pure, primal terror. And it is the story of how a man with no legs fought off the entire African food chain using nothing but a rock and a piece of scrap metal. If you are fascinated by the brutal reality of nature and the indomitable human will to survive against the odds, please hit that subscribe *** button right now. You need to hear this story because it proves that even when you are broken, bleeding, and surrounded by monsters, you are not dead until you decide to be. To understand the irony of this disaster, we have to look at the man. Greg Rasmussen was not a tourist. He was a warrior for nature. Born in London but raised in Africa, he was a biologist dedicated to saving one of the most misunderstood animals on the continent, the painted dog, African wild dog. These dogs were endangered, farmers shot them, cars hit them. Greg loved them. He founded the Painted Dog Conservation Project in Zimbabwe. He spent his life tracking them, studying them, and fighting for their survival. He was comfortable in the bush. He knew the risks. He was a pilot who flew a light aircraft, a Piper J3 Cub, to track the herds from the air. He felt safe in the sky. The sky was his office. On a hot afternoon in 1990, Greg took off from an airstrip near Hwange National Park in Zimbabwe. It was a routine flight. He was alone. He was wearing a t-shirt and khaki shorts. He had no survival gear, no water, and no radio plan, because he was only supposed to be up for a short time. He was flying low, about 300 feet, scanning the ground for tracking collars. He was in his element. But the African wind is unpredictable. Wind shear is a killer. It is a sudden, violent change in wind velocity or direction. As Greg banked the small plane to get a better look at something on the ground, a massive gust of wind hit the aircraft from behind. It stripped the lift from the wings. The plane dropped like a stone. Greg slammed the throttle forward. He pulled back on the stick. But physics had already made the decision. The plane stalled. It entered a spin. Greg saw the acacia trees rushing up. He saw the hard, baked earth. He knew in that split second that he was going to crash. He didn't have time to pray. He just had time to brace. The plane hit the ground at 80 miles per hour. It didn't glide, it cartwheeled. The wings ripped off, the fuselage buckled, the engine smashed into the cockpit. The noise was deafening, the screaming of tearing metal, the shattering of glass, and the sickening thud of impact. And then silence. The dust settled, the birds stopped singing. Greg Rasmussen was sitting in the ruins of his plane, in the middle of nowhere. Greg didn't pass out. He was conscious through the whole thing. His first thought was fire. The smell of high-octane aviation fuel was overpowering. He knew that if a spark hit that fuel, he would be incinerated instantly. He had to get out. He tried to unbuckle his seatbelt. His hands were shaking, but they worked. He tried to stand up. And that is when the world turned into white-hot agony. He looked down at his legs. They were destroyed. The engine block had smashed into the cockpit and crushed his lower body. His right leg was broken in multiple places. The tibia and fibula were pulverized. His left leg was worse. It was almost severed. The bones were protruding through the skin. His foot was hanging at a grotesque angle, facing backward. He couldn't walk. He couldn't crawl. He could barely wiggle his toes. The pain was absolute. It was the kind of pain that causes the brain to shut down. But the fear of fire kept him awake. He grabbed the metal frame of the door. Using only his arm strength, he dragged himself out of the cockpit. He fell onto the thorny African ground. He dragged his broken legs behind him, screaming with every inch. He pulled himself about 10 feet away from the wreckage. He collapsed in the dirt, gasping for air, waiting for the explosion. But the explosion never came. The fuel evaporated, the danger of fire passed, and it was replaced by a danger far more terrifying. Greg lay in the dirt. He took stock of his situation. He was alive, but he was in critical condition. He was losing blood. He was going into shock. He had no water. It was 115 degrees F, 46 degrees C in the shade, and he was lying in the sun. And he was in Wreckage National Park. This park is famous for having one of the highest densities of lions in Africa. The crash had made a massive noise. Every predator within a 5-mile radius had heard it. In the wild, a loud noise followed by silence usually means one thing: an animal is hurt. And a hurt animal is an easy meal. The first visitors arrived within an hour. Vultures. They started circling high above, black specks in the blue sky. Then they spiraled lower. They landed in the trees around the crash site. They stared at him with their dead, beady eyes. They were waiting. Vultures are patient. They don't attack living things usually. They wait for you to stop moving. Greg yelled at them, "Get away." They hopped a little closer. They knew he was broken. They could smell the blood. The next visitors were not waiting for him to die. They wanted to kill him. Elephants. We think of elephants as gentle giants, but in the wild, they are fiercely territorial and aggressive, especially toward things they don't understand. A herd of elephants approached the crash site. They saw the twisted metal of the plane. They smelled the fuel. They saw the human lying on the ground. They didn't like it. A massive bull elephant charged. He trumpeted, a sound so loud it vibrates in your chest. He ran toward the wreckage. Greg was lying right next to it. If the elephant decided to stomp the plane, Greg would be flattened like a pancake. Greg made himself as small as possible. He held his breath. The elephant stopped just feet away. He kicked the plane. He threw dust on it. He stared at Greg. Greg stared back, terrified. Eventually, the bull decided the metal beast was dead, and he led the herd away. Greg let out a breath he had been holding for minutes. But the sun was starting to set. And in Africa, when the sun goes down, the real monsters come out. The sun set. The heat of the day vanished, replaced by a chill. Greg was shivering from shock and blood loss. He was dehydrated. His tongue felt like sandpaper. He dragged himself back toward the fuselage. He needed protection. He managed to prop himself up against the tail section. He grabbed a piece of aluminum that had ripped off the wing, and he grabbed a rock. This was his weapon, a drum. It got dark, pitch black. Then he heard it. A low, guttural growl. It vibrates through the ground. It is a sound that triggers a primal fear in every human DNA strand. Lions. And not just one, a pride. They were curious. They smelled the blood. They saw the crippled creature. Greg couldn't see them at first. He could only hear them moving in the tall grass, the snapping of twigs, the heavy breathing. Then he shone his small penlight, which he luckily had in his pocket. Eyes. Glowing yellow eyes. They were circling him, testing him. Predators don't like to get hurt. They check if the prey can fight back. A lioness approached. She came within 20 feet. Greg didn't scream. Screaming sounds like a dying animal. Instead, he banged the rock against the aluminum wing. Clang, clang, clang. The metallic, unnatural sound startled the lioness. She jumped back. Or she hissed. Greg banged again, clang. Get back, he shouted in a deep, aggressive voice. He knew he had to act big. He had to act like a predator, not prey. The lions paced. They snarled. They came closer, then retreated when the metal banged. This went on for hours. Greg was exhausted. His arms were heavy. He was fighting to stay awake. He knew that if he fell asleep, they would be on him in seconds. So he sat there, a broken man in the dark, banging a piece of metal against a wrecked plane, waging a psychological war against the apex predators of Africa. Eventually, the lions lost interest or decided the metal beast was too weird to eat. They drifted away. But Greg didn't get to rest, because something smaller came. Matabele ants. These are large, aggressive, flesh-eating ants. They swarmed over his legs. Greg couldn't feel his legs because of the nerve damage, but he could see them. Hundreds of ants crawling into his open wounds. They were eating his exposed flesh. They were drinking his blood. Greg tried to brush them off, but there were too many. He watched in horror as his own body was being consumed bit by bit. He realized he was decomposing while he was still alive. It was a moment of pure body horror. He wept, he prayed, he thought about using a shard of glass to end it. But something stopped him, the anger. I am not going to die here. I am not going to be lion food. Sunrise, day 2. The lions left, the heat returned. Dehydration was now the killer. Greg had lost so much fluid, his kidneys were shutting down. He started to hallucinate. He saw water everywhere. He saw rivers. He saw ice cream trucks. He grabbed a piece of the plane's upholstery and tried to suck the moisture out of the foam. It tasted like gasoline. He urinated into a piece of plastic wreckage. He drank it. It was hot, salty, and disgusting, but it was fluid. He scanned the sky. He knew his friends would be looking for him. He saw a plane. A search plane. He waved his shirt. He flashed his watch at the sun to create a reflection. The plane flew right over him. It kept going. They couldn't see him. The plane wreckage was painted cream and brown, camouflage colors to hide from animals. It also hid him from rescuers. The plane disappeared. Greg screamed. He punched the ground. To be seen and ignored is a fate worse than death. Night 2. The lions didn't come back, but the hyenas did. Hyenas are worse than lions. Lions kill you before they eat you. Hyenas eat you while you are still alive. They possess one of the strongest bite forces in the animal kingdom. They can crush bone like chalk. They circled him, laughing their manic giggles. Greg was weaker now. He could barely lift the rock. Clang, clang. The sound was pathetic. The hyenas moved closer. They were emboldened. Greg threw rocks at them. He managed to hit one. It yelped and ran. The others hesitated. Greg passed out from exhaustion. He woke up terrified, expecting to feel teeth tearing into his stomach. But he was still alone. The hyenas, cowardly scavengers, had decided he wasn't quite dead enough yet. They would wait. Day 3. Greg was fatting. He couldn't lift his head. The ants had done terrible damage to his legs. Gangrene was setting in. The smell of rotting meat was coming from his own body. He accepted that this was the end. He heard an engine. Another plane. He didn't have the energy to wave. He just lay there. But this pilot was different. It was a friend of his, a fellow pilot who knew Greg's flight path. He was flying low. He saw a glint. Not the plane. The sun reflected off the piece of aluminum Greg had been using as a drum. That shiny piece of metal, polished by his banging, caught the pilot's eye. The pilot circled. He saw the wreckage. He saw the body. He dipped his wings. Greg saw the signal. He burst into tears. They see me. A helicopter arrived hours later. The paramedics jumped out. When they reached Greg, they recoiled. The smell of the gangrene, the fuel, and the dried blood was overwhelming. Greg looked like a corpse that had been dug up. "Don't worry, mate," the paramedics said. "We got you." They loaded him onto the chopper. As they lifted off, Greg looked down at the site. He saw the lions coming back out of the grass. They had been waiting just a few hundred yards away. If he had stayed one more night, there would have been nothing left to rescue. At the hospital in Harare, the doctors took one look at his legs and shook their heads. "We have to amputate," they said. "Both of them. The infection is too deep. The bones are dust." Greg refused. "No," he whispered. "I need my legs. I need to walk." The doctors argued. "You will die of sepsis." "I survived the lions," Greg said. "I will survive this." He underwent ***, 100 surgeries ***. Doctors rebuilt his legs using bone grafts, metal rods, and skin grafts. It took 5 years. He had to learn to walk again. He grew 3 inches shorter because of the bone loss. But he kept his legs. The Greg Rasmussen story is a masterclass in anti-fragility. When the plane crashed, he was fragile. But the environment hardened him. He turned a piece of garbage aluminum into a shield. He turned his fear into aggression. He realized that in the wild, if you act like a victim, you die. If you act like a monster, you might live. It is also a story of extreme irony. He devoted his life to saving animals, and those animals tried to kill him. Most people would hate nature after that. Most people would never go back to the bush. But Greg Rasmussen didn't quit. Once he could walk, he went right back to Zimbabwe. He went right back to Hwange National Park. He continued his work saving the painted dogs. He bought a new plane. He flew again. He famously said, "Nature doesn't owe you anything. It wasn't personal. The lions were just being lions. I was just lunch." He is the man who crashed in the lion's den. He is the man who banged the drum of life until death got annoyed and walked away. And he is living proof that the human spirit is the toughest material on earth, tougher than aluminum, tougher than bone, and definitely tougher than a lion's jaw. This story is just pure adrenaline. The image of him banging that metal wing while yellow eyes stared at him in the dark is straight out of a horror movie. Do you think you could have held it together, or would the fear have paralyzed you? Let me know in the comments below. If you are amazed by Greg's fight against the food chain, please hit that asterisk like asterisk button. And subscribe asterisk. I have a story coming next week about a diver who got left behind in the open ocean by his tour boat and had to survive the night in shark-infested waters. Stay safe, respect the wild, and make some noise.